requesting that the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises conducts a full parliamentary inquiry into the capture of SOEs by the Guptas, refers to a number of allegations of undue influence that have been raised in relation to the Guptas' involvement in a number of state-owned enterprises, and asks that the Guptas be summoned to appear, that, amongst others, Minister Gigaba be summoned to appear, that COEs and chairpersons of the largest SOEs be summoned to appear. And the evidence is that the committee, because of the view taken by the African National Congress members of Parliament, refused to conduct that inquiry. Now, my first question to you is this: with the benefit of hindsight, do you agree that that was ill-advised and it would have been far better had they acceded to that request?
Yes, it was ill-advised. But as it turns out, this mistake, this error was then corrected as we moved forward, as set out in the late Jackson Mthembu's affidavit, where he says these committees started being very active. But at the time, I would say it was ill-advised.
Now, Mr. President, this would have been a matter of great sensitivity, I assume, whether or not, at that time in our history, a portfolio committee should or should not accede to a request for a public inquiry of the type we're seeing here. Did this matter come before the political committee for guidance?
Not in that direct manner. It did not come to the political committee in that direct manner. What obviously was being discussed on an ongoing basis was these concerns that were continuously being raised, and to find a way of having to deal with them. And also to find a way, we would have discussed a way of empowering our portfolio committees to be able to take up the issues. And in many ways, because the ANC was the leading party in Parliament, it needed to be activated by the ANC as well. And when it was, then I wouldn't want to say all hell broke loose, but that's when the process really started in earnest.
Can I refer you, Mr. President, to the article at page 621 in the same bundle?
Yes, 621, yes.
You will see it's an article dated the 8th, if I read it correctly, the 8th, sorry, it's the 29th of March 2016, so a week or two after that request that we've just looked at from Ms. Matsoni, and it's dealing with the ANC's response to that request. Under the headline, ANC, DA's claims of support for Gupta probe delusional. And then in the second paragraph, you will see that according to a statement issued by the African National Congress, the DA chief whip's ridiculous claims in the media that the ANC chief whip, Jackson Mthembu, has agreed to the DA's opportunistic proposal for Parliament to institute an investigation into the alleged state capture by the Gupta family are imaginary and baseless, said the ANC in a statement attributed to the office of the party's chief whip. And then if I can take you to the next page, the third last paragraph, starting the ANC. The ANC said only a delusional misapprehension would interpret this clear assertion on parliamentary debates to mean that the ANC chief whip supports the DA's proposal for parliamentary investigation into alleged state influence by the Gupta family. Now, Mr. President, this must call into question the commitment that you say was expressed in the preceding national conference about the need to utilize Parliament as an instrument for oversight. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, is this not an entirely regrettable stance that was adopted by the African National Congress in relation to parliamentary oversight?
Well, I think these type of response should be seen within the context of fulcrum of contestation between and revolve around when an issue is raised, how it is raised, who raised it. As you can see, there was an interaction between the then chief whip of the ANC, late Mthembu, and representatives of the other parties. An understanding around as state democracy and a nascent democracy at that. It is developing, it is growing and maturing. On matters like these, where the issues that had been raised were now being properly and fully entertained. And so the process was developing and growing.
Mr. President, can I refer you to page 624, please, in Bundle 2? Now, this is the beginning of an extract where you will see it's from Hansard, and it relates to allegations of state capture by certain individuals and their alleged undue influence over the government. And we have the whole Hansard quote, but if I can then take you to what's really pertinent, which is at page 654.
654.
654.
Yes.
There you will see that one Mr. Manier of the Democratic Alliance moves a motion in the House, on the floor of the National Assembly. Do you have it?
Yes.
And the motion is that the House, 1, notes the allegations of state capture by certain individuals and their alleged undue influence over the government. 2, establishes an ad hoc committee in terms of Rule 253(1)(a), the committee to A, investigate the alleged capture of state resources and undue influence over the government, B, recommend measures in line with the Assembly's oversight constitutional mandate to prevent such incidents from occurring, and then it goes on to propose how this should be constituted. Now, it's a matter of record that the ANC caucus voted against this motion. And what I haven't specifically referred you to is what appears on the next page, at page 655. There you will see that a counter motion was proposed. And the counter motion was far from Parliament appointing an ad hoc committee to investigate. What the African National Congress proposed was the following, to be replaced with the following: 2, refers all such allegations of state capture to the SA Police Service or Chapter 9 institutions for investigation, including the Public Protector. 3, notes that all parties and individual members of Parliament with evidence of such alleged state capture should make available such evidence to the police service or Chapter 9 institution. And 4, further notes that such investigations by either police service or a Chapter 9 institution should culminate in prosecution of all individuals or companies engaged in such stage capture if such is proved as a criminal activity. Now, that seems to be in line with a line of evidence in your affidavit about the approach adopted by the NEC. The NEC's approach was, as I understand it, on the one hand, there was in March of 2016 a proposal that if persons with information of relevance would please come to the offices of the African National Congress, presumably through the Secretary General's office, they can bring their information, or 2, go to the police or other institutions. But what seems absolutely clear, I want to put to you for comment, is that there was a very determined resistance and unwillingness that Parliament should exercise what you have said this morning was its duty in the face of these sorts of accusations. A complete unwillingness to enable Parliament to investigate and exercise oversight. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, do you accept that is fair?
Well, let me put it this way. I think at the time, Chairperson, the thinking would clearly have been which of the structures we have in the state that would have a greater effectiveness of investigating these matters and coming to a conclusion that prosecutorial processes should commence. And at this stage, rather than say there was resistance as such to have these matters investigated, I would say no. It was thought at the time that the other institutions, the public protector, the police, would possibly have a much better grip on all these matters because they would go way beyond maybe what Parliament can do. They would immediately, if they find fault, have prosecutorial powers. But if you look at it with hindsight, I would say the two would not be mutually exclusive, and if anything, both tracks could easily have been followed to have your parliamentary process as well as another more effective investigative process. So I wouldn't say it was a cop-out. I think it was the alternative motion that was being put on the table was let's get this done more effectively to the extent that it could.
Can I refer you, please, Mr. President, back to your affidavit in Bundle 1 at page 52.
Oh, Bundle 1, yes. I'm on Bundle 2.
Bundle 1.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
I apologize for that.
Not at all.
Looking at the wrong bundle. Yes.
You will recall this is in your own affidavit, paragraph 125. You say it is clear from Mr. Mtembu's account, and you're referring there to the affidavit he submitted to the Commission, that the determination of the ANC in Parliament to probe these allegations was both a response to the evidence of wrongdoing that was accumulating in the public domain and the implementation of the decisions taken by the ANC's constitutional structures, especially its NEC, to ensure proper investigation to these allegations. Now, what I want to put to you for comment is this. We will come in a moment to the Frolic Committee's investigations and how successful they were or were not. But what I want to put to you at the moment for comment is that it is simply not correct, as a matter of fact, that prior to the Frolic letters, Parliament, the ANC and Parliament, in response to evidence of wrongdoing that was accumulating, was determined in Parliament to probe these allegations. The true fact of the matter is it was determined not to probe them in Parliament. Is that not correct?
Well, I wouldn't say so, that it was not determined to probe them in Parliament. I would say it was determined to have them probed. Initially there was inertia. There was not much movement, that we will concede. And when it became clear that the evidence was just accumulating, initially the thinking was investigate them through your law enforcement agencies or one of your Chapter 9 institutions. And in the end, the parliamentary process or the parliamentary track was then activated to go ahead. I think where you could say there was fault, Chairperson, was the delay in having it done. And I would be the first to concede that there was a delay. And it should have been done a lot earlier.
Maybe I should say this at this stage, Mr. President, because I wanted to say it, but I was going to say it later, because Mr. Freund has got a certain amount of time to use, and I want him to use it. I was going to ask you exactly that, whether the delay in acting, both in respect of the ANC as a party and in respect of Parliament, and maybe one should focus in that regard on the fact that the majority of MPs are ANC, whether the delay was not acceptable, particularly for me, quite apart from what was coming out in the media, but also taking that into account after the waterproof land. That the ANC and Parliament took a number of years after 2013. The waterproof landing was in April, or I think end of April 2013. That they took another 3 years or so, June 2017, that is now the portfolio committees to start being active. Seems to me to be a delay that is difficult to accept, you know. And I would also factor the same in regard to the ANC, to say, with what Mr. Philip Mbalula had said at the NEC meeting in 2011, with what was in the media after that, certainly the ANC ought to have done something much earlier than it did, to say something needs to be done. This is something that needs to be done urgently. I don't know whether you want to comment on that, Mr. President.
No.
I just think 2017 was too far, and there seems to have been enough that had happened for the ANC and portfolio committees and Parliament to have acted much earlier. And if they had done so, it may well be that some of the damage that happened in the meantime may have been avoided.
Chairperson, I did say in my opening statement that I am not here to make any excuses.
Yes, you did, Mr. President. Yes.
And I also said that I am not here to defend the indefensible. I also said that, yes, I'm also here to explain
Yes.
some of the lapses that happened. And what I can say is that, yes, you're absolutely right, Chairperson, DCJ, in saying that the delayed reaction to all this was not a correct way to handle matters. And I will concede that. And I did also say that in my opening statement that because we are a political organism and there are continuous debates and contestations, and even in society and in the ANC, the contestation on the existence of state capture continued for quite a while, and I guess it will continue right until you present your report, because there are those in the nation who deny that there was state capture, and indeed, in many sectors of society and organizations, the same obtains, as it does in the ANC as well. So that amount of contestation about matters of this nature could in many ways have led also to the delayed reaction. And these contestations do take place, as I said, without bemoaning the point, in various organizations. What we should be grateful for, Deputy Chief Justice, is that we've now arrived as the African National Congress at a point where, as I said, the majority of members of the African National Congress agreed that state capture is something that militates against the interests of our people at a social and economic level, and it also weakens our own organization as it gives rise to all manner of challenges like factionalism and divisions. But what is good is that we are now here. Many other leaders of the ANC have appeared here.
Yes.
And so am I. And
Yes.
to agree with you that
Yes.
the delay did not serve our country well.
Yes.
But we're here to take corrective measures and say, we've got a country that belongs to all of us. Let us work together to build this country going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Freund?
Thank you, Mr. President. I have very little time remaining, so certain issues I would have covered with you I'm going to leave. But there are two aspects that I'd like to wrap up with. The first is if I could refer you to page 74, Bundle 1.
Of Bundle 1, 70.
Your own affidavit.
Yes.
You yourself make the point, and with respect correctly, you say this. This is paragraph 167.2 at page 74. The ability of any organization, but especially a political formation, to act on allegations of malfeasance relies not only on its formal rules and procedures, but also on the balance of power within its structures. The question I want to ask you is whether you accept, and if you do accept, if you could elaborate a little, that precisely this factor, the balance of power within ANC structures, actually is the true explanation for the delays that you now say are, with the benefit of hindsight, regrettable.
Yes, I would say so. This is precisely the point I was making to you, Chairperson, that there has been contestation in terms of even understanding what state capture is. Is it the capture of the judiciary? Is it the capture of the executive? Is it the capture of which arm of the state. So those contestations have ensued, and the preponderance of views now in the African National Congress is that there has been a major problem. And as I said yesterday, there's been a massive system failure. And we need to correct what has happened in the past and chart a new path, a completely different path for our country, and correct the wrongs of the past. I think that is generally accepted, and that is the balance of understanding, the balance of conviction, and the balance of conscience as well, that I am also addressing here.
Mr. President, finally, I want to turn to a very controversial question which has been much debated before the Commission, and precisely because it has been much debated, I'll leave it in the hands of the Chair to what extent he wishes me to pursue this. But it's the question of party discipline and party instructions in relation to questions such as the votes of no confidence, which is part of a bigger question. And the bigger question, which you address in your affidavit, and will be part of the record, which will of course be taken into consideration by the Commission, but the bigger question is whether, having regard to the oath of office of MPs,
To what, sorry?
to the oath of office
Yes.
taken by MPs, which we debated right at the outset, there are not issues on which the party must accept that whatever views it would prefer its MPs to take, there comes a point at which the duty of the member is to act in accordance with the member's own understanding of the constitutional obligations, and where necessary, to vote, as for example Dr. Makosi did on the vote of no confidence. Now, as I read your affidavit, you're a little equivocal, but if I have to say, where do you finally come down? I think you come down on the point of view that an ANC MP must simply accept party discipline and do as told. And what I want to explore with you is whether I understand you correctly or whether you accept that there comes a point that there must be an exception to that rule.
Our political system is granted by our Constitution is that of a party system, and where representatives that are elected by our people go to represent the party. And that is our system. They don't go and represent themselves and their jackets. That being said, though, they do take an oath as each member of parliament goes into their positions, and the oath that they take places the Constitution and the country and the nation first. And we accept that. But in order for the party to put a member in parliament, they don't put themselves there, notwithstanding the decisions of the Constitutional Court recently. They are transported, as it were, by the party to be in parliament, and the party functions as a collective on all matters. That's why we have a caucus, and this happens all over the world. We've adopted a Westminster system. The Westminster system, has a caucus system as well, where members of parliament of a particular party will meet on their own, collectively take decisions on how to approach certain issues that are debated in parliament. So there is a party line on all issues. Even where there is a single member who will propose a bill, the party basically coalesces around and behind that member. Given that that is the case, the party itself will insist on party discipline and insist that we vote together, but that vote is also inspired or based on discussions that happen in the party. There are study groups where people study issues very intricately, and there are party discussions in the party itself and in the caucus, so that informs the understanding and indeed the conscience of members to vote as they would. However, there are matters, Chairperson, where the individual conscience of a member would be such that it would compel them to act and vote in a particular way. And that too needs to be discussed. It needs to be put on the table. In our past, we've had votes on issues such as termination of pregnancy, where certain members have had strong religious views that are based on their religious affiliations. And those have had to be discussed. And in those cases, an allowance has been made that your religious affiliation and your conscience needs to be given consideration, and that is brought to bear on what needs to happen. But in the main, I must say, with the current political dispensation we have, it is the party line that is followed, and followed all over the world. It was of great interest to watch what was happening in the United States recently, where, and I don't know whether they have a caucus system like we have in their Congress and the Senate, where the members voted slightly differently from the party line, and that led to a lot of ostracization and a whole lot of other challenges that some of those members have, because there's a downside to doing things like that. But when your conscience drives you, I guess you are prepared to take the downside. So whilst you may argue that I'm equivocal, I am a party person. So I'm a party animal and have to be, because I'm the president of the ANC. If I'm to be faulted, let me be faulted on that. But I do, however, open a window to look at issues of conscience that drive particular individuals to want to buck the trend, to want to go against what the party might well want. And that is often exceptional. It's not often the rule. By and large, members of a party, certainly the members of the ANC, will always want to go along with the party rule. And I think former Secretary General Gwede Mantashe addresses this quite pointedly in his affidavit, because on a matter which Mr. Freund refers to, of a vote of no confidence, where anyone outside would say, vote as you wish, he argues that you've got to look at very, very closely at the consequences of that action, because you need to look at if you vote to remove, and we've done that within the party ourselves, to remove a president through a vote of no confidence, what then ensues? Because when you do that, you're actually imploding the executive. You're imploding it, and you've got to do all manner of things to reconstitute that. And members then have to ask themselves, is that what we want? And certainly, if that is the desire, which is collectively agreed to, then that is what should be opted for. but we are actually saying you need to analyze the situation very carefully so that we just don't run blindly into something that is emotionally charged. I hope that helps you, Mr.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Chair, I think my time is up, and unless there's anything you'd like me to pursue further,
No, that's fine. I know that you can't be with us for a long time, as I understand the position. I do want to take this issue further with the President after the tea break.
Yes, please.
I thought you would.
I definitely want to. If you are still around.
No, I'm certainly here, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all right. So I think let's take the tea adjournment, and then we can take it a little further. Yeah. Okay, we are nearly 11:20. Let's take the tea break. We'll resume at 11:25. We adjourn. Now, Mr. President, from what you have said, it's quite clear that you accept that it's very important that Parliament should perform its functions of oversight properly and should hold the executive accountable. You agree? Yeah.
My apologies, I do agree.
Yes.
Chief Justice.
Yes, and of course, you referred also to one of the resolutions of the National Conference of the ANC in 2012, in terms of which the conference resolved that Parliament should be more active, which you explained includes performing its oversight functions, as I understand it properly.
Yes,
That's correct.
Chairperson.
And you would accept too, would you not, that the provisions relating to the vote of no confidence in the Constitution constitute part of the mechanisms that the Constitution makes available to Parliament in order to hold the executive accountable?
I accept and I agree.
Yes. Would you also accept that the oath of office to which Mr. Freund referred earlier on means that the members of Parliament have got to put the interests of the people of South Africa first?
I accept and I agree to that.
You agree to that?
Yeah.
Now, when there is a motion of no confidence placed before members of Parliament, my understanding is this, and I just want you to comment whether you agree with my understanding. My understanding is that what each member of Parliament is called upon to do is to ask himself the question, or herself the question, do I still have confidence in this president?
Yes.
You agree?
Yes.
Yes. Now,
Or do we collectively have confidence in this?
well, she votes alone, Mr. President. So now, if that is the correct question that each member of Parliament is called upon to answer, is the position not that when his or her political party instructs her or him to vote in a particular way, irrespective of what her position is as to whether she still has confidence in this president or not, isn't that should not be right? Because she has taken an oath. This is a constitutional obligation that the Constitution contemplates he or she should perform. She thinks, I've lost confidence in this president. It is not in the interest of the people of South Africa that he or she should continue to be president. He or she is taking the country somewhere else. That's what she or he believes. So if the party says, no, vote a different way, is that not acceptable within the constitutional framework that we are talking about, within her oath of office and within the context of the question that he or she is called upon to answer?
Yes, Chairperson. It is a controversial issue, and there is a tension between.
Yes.
And let me say, we are not the only ones who are postulating or thinking about this matter. We're not the only ones in the world. Even your oldest democracies at this point in time deliberating over these types of matters. The Constitution, obviously, looks, and in a way there's a bit of a schizophrenic type of relationship there, because the Constitution has given rise to a party system in our Constitution. But at the same time, in terms of of the very same Constitution, in terms of what the Constitutional Court decided recently about the freedom of every person to exercise their own political rights, has actually said you stand as an individual. But we also have a constitution where a member takes, as I was saying earlier, their oath as an individual and pledging their loyalty to the Republic and to the Constitution. So there is a tension that is created there. But political parties, by their nature, have what you could call a herd mentality. So, like cattle, they move together as a herd. So, that being the case, we do say, and I do say that there is always an exception for one or two or few members of the herd to hold different views. But the general rule of thumb in a party system is that you go along the party dictum or party lines. And in exceptional circumstances, for instance, where there is a major risk to democracy, where it is clear that the conscience of a particular members is driving them towards saying we've got to defend democracy, and one of the ways we can defend democracy is to go against what the herd believes should be the direction. So I would argue, yes, that is allowable, but it is an exception, because the general rule of thumb is party discipline. And if you look even at our current parties, and you will find that even other parties in our system are much more disciplinarian than the ANC, where if you violate party rules, you get dismissed and get fired instantly, without even a hearing. And the ANC has tended to have a slightly more liberal type of approach to this. Also with a view of saying we want to head everyone in the same direction. So in exceptional circumstances where democracy is at risk, or where there is a real conscientious member who believes that my religion, my certain beliefs are propelling me to go in a different direction, it is a matter that should be discussed. And this being a party system, it is allowable that it should be discussed, it should be understood, and then in the end, the party leadership will say, we will allow that. And they would then be free to vote in whatever way. So whilst I tend to fall more towards party discipline, there is the other, if you like, liberal side of me that says you can actually have an exception where conscientiousness, as well as a risk to democracy, has to be paid attention to. That's what I would say.
Of course, the position would be most of the time, I guess, that whoever is president of the country, because the vote of no confidence is directed, I think,
At the president.
at the president.
Yeah.
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 The president of the country will, I think, almost always be
The victim.
well, yeah, or the target. But also the president of the country is likely to be, most of the time, the president of the majority party.
Indeed.
And he or she is president of the majority party because he or she enjoys majority support in the party.
Indeed.
And if she or he enjoys majority support in the party, he or she is likely to enjoy majority support among members of parliament of that party in parliament.
Indeed.
And if that is so, it may well be that the issue of a vote of no confidence, I mean, the mechanism of accountability of the vote of no confidence, which is meant to keep the president on his or her toes, will be rendered ineffective if the president will know that there is no way Parliament can pass a vote of no confidence in me, because my party will never allow that. What do you say to that?
But I think any president should want to serve the people and the country, knowing that they enjoy the support of the parliament, if not the entire parliament, the majority of the members of the parliament, which elects him or her into that position. And if they no longer enjoy that support of the majority of the parliamentarians, then they should accept that they've lost it and be willing to be subjected to that type of vote of no confidence, because it basically means that they would be saying, well, you have basically failed to lead government. However, if amongst that majority of the members there are a few who would hold a different view, but then the majority is still retained, then I would say they should not have any fear. And those few would be, or some of those would then have articulated their concerns about the confidence that they still have in that president. So in other words, the debate would have had to have ensued in the majority party, where it would have had to be clear to the president that I no longer have the support, because those who are in parliament are then really representatives of the entire body of the party itself. Yeah.
Of course, Mr. President, the approach that you take, that the ANC takes, because I think Mr. Mantashe also took the same line, means in effect, and I would like you to comment on this, means in effect that before a president of the country can be voted out of office through a motion of no confidence, the majority party should have lost confidence in him on its own, or in him or her on its own.
Yes.
In which case, probably it might not need to go through that process to just use its own structures and processes to recall him.
Yes.
And if that is so, the question arises, why do we then need these provisions of the Constitution about a vote of no confidence in the president of the country if everything will be dictated by the majority party, can be dictated by the majority party outside of parliament?
No. I hold a different view,
Yes.
Chairperson, because
Yes.
we need checks and balances.
Yes.
The check and balance that is embedded in our Constitution is a strong enough sword of Damascus which hangs over the head of a president. But the other important check and balance is in the party itself, where the party system, the party will go through a number of processes. And I think that is where the strength of our constitutional structure or architecture rests, that it does not necessarily just revolve around an individual. It revolves around a collection of people who will apply their minds. And sometimes you could argue, well, maybe they could be brainwashed or they could all be captured or whatever. There is that risk. But in the main, the check and balance is that it will be in the party. We've had in our history 2 situations where we've had presidents removed, or recalled rather, not removed, but recalled by their own party. A very painful process, deeply painful, and that wrought divisions in the governing party that almost tore the governing party apart. But it was an important check and balance, which in many ways, if it had cascaded all the way through to Parliament, would have really divided the party down the middle. And maybe that stopped that, and decisions were then taken in the party itself. So I don't think we should ever see political parties as alien entities. They are part of our constitutional architecture, and they have very good checks and balances. Sometimes they fail, but for the most part, there would be, good checks and balances that can put the brakes on a runaway vehicle that is going to crash. But then again, it does not mean that that dilutes the efficacy of the construct that we have in the Constitution that provides for a vote of no confidence in a president. Because when the wheels have come off in the party itself, you do need that check and balance in the constitution of the country, where you would be able to have the type of outcome that you're talking about.
Well, let me just say this in case it's misunderstood.
Yes.
I think what I'm saying would apply to even opposition parties. I think that that is now, if it is correct to say, in the context of a vote of no confidence, it's the individual who must make up his or her mind about whether he or she has lost confidence in the president, and bearing in mind their oath of office. So that even with the opposition parties, if it's not right for the majority party to give an instruction, it wouldn't be right for the opposition party to say, you are instructed, in effect, to vote in support of the vote of no confidence. So it would apply both sides. It's a question of whether it's correct. And of course, we know that there was the secret ballot judgment of the Constitutional Court which dealt with some of these issues. And obviously, we all have to have due regard to what it said. But I agree that it's not an easy subject. It's controversial in the context of party, the kind of system that we have. But obviously, faced with what this commission is investigating, it would be failing in its duty if it didn't look as deep as possible into saying, what are the things that made these things happen? Because one of the questions we posed to Parliament was the mechanisms of oversight and of holding the executive accountable that you have, are they adequate? Were they adequate for the purposes for which they've been put in place? Were they used? You know, and of course, when you come to the vote of no confidence, the evidence emerged that, well, sometimes the majority party gave instruction to members of parliament to say, thou shalt not vote that way, vote this way. And the question arises whether what that does to is that what the Constitution contemplated? Is that the right thing constitutionally or not? But I think you have put your views, Mr. President. so I don't know whether you want to say anything before I allow Mr. Yes.
I do, because it's interesting that you also talk about opposition parties, because opposition parties here also have that same head mentality. And when they vote as a bloc. Even when they walk out of parliament, they walk out as a bloc, as a head of cattle. You just see one of them walking out and they all follow. And that is, in a way, that is another check and balance, because what it does, it shows disapproval that they want to display of whatever. And sometimes when the presiding officers rule that one of them should walk out, they all walk out as a bloc. So it's a very controversial issue.
It is, yes.
It really is.
No, it is very controversial. And yes, Mr. Freund.
Thank you, Chair. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Freund.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. Pretorius.
Can I go home now?
It's too early, Mr. President. Too early. Mr. Pretorius will toy if you leave now.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Mr. President.
Morning, Mr. Pretorius.
We stopped yesterday at the issue of party funding, and we were dealing with the funding relationship, at least between BOSASA on the one hand and the African National Congress on the other. By way of background, between 2007 and 2009, there were a number of press articles about corruption involving BOSASA and the administration, at least. There was an SIU investigation that received a lot of publicity, and in 2009, charges were contemplated. For some reason, nothing happened for over 10 years, and that reason has been explored fully, or virtually fully in evidence, and the Chair will make his findings in regard to that. In 2015, Ms. Dudumiyeni handed copies of the investigation file to Mr. Angelo Agrisi. That evidence, as we regard it, stands. And at least the former president, it is probable that he knew of it because she was there on the foundation of the former president's expenses. there were several meetings between Mr. Watson and the leadership of the ANC. And finally, in the media, the relationship between Mr. Gavin Watson and the party leadership in the ANC was manifest. There was that war room at the elections, you will know about that, that was financed by Bosasa operations. And it was no secret. In those circumstances, it's difficult to accept that vigilant members of the ANC would not have been aware, firstly, of the fact that Bosasa was helping the African National Congress through donations and benefits. And secondly, that the company involved, Bosasa, was the recipient of large contracts under dubious circumstances from government. That being so, how could it happen? And the facts are there. How could it happen? And that's the second question, broad question that we ask, that the party continued to receive benefits from and be financed by Bosasa.
I think it's a valid question, a very, very valid question. And one should have been aware at an earlier stage about all this. I went to the election center, which Bosasa helped to finance during the election campaign. And even then, it never really, I must be honest, occurred to me, firstly, that they were bankrolling or they were financing in full that whole center on behalf of the ANC. The Treasurer General, as well as colleagues or comrades who ran the elections, knew, and I must say, it never really fully occurred to me. So, with hindsight, and as they say, hindsight is the exact science, one would say we should have been more alert, particularly to those reports that had emerged a lot earlier, because during the course of all this, I mean, there was almost like a 9-year, 10-year period after they had occurred, according to my own recollection. So there had been a lapse. Ordinarily, as I think I said in my evidence, my opening statement, we would not knowingly and intentionally accept donations from companies or donors with who had been involved in criminal activity and all that. So that should be regarded as a major lapse on our part, particularly that proven that they had obtained their contracts unlawfully.
That is viewed at hindsight, but looking at what was happening at the time, I'm not sure that hindsight is an accounting for what happened. It's an explanation. One can shut the door on it, and one can resolve not to do so in future. And that's been the trend of the evidence thus far, and I'm going to deal with that issue in due course.
Yeah.
But it's difficult to avoid the conclusion on the facts that in the circumstances, the ANC received donations from Bosasa and Bosasa officials, board members, leaders in Bosasa, in circumstances which were such that required a proper investigation, and that the principle that it would not knowingly accept donations in these dubious circumstances was in fact breached because people knew. The president of the time knew.
Yes. Yes, Chairperson.
And is it not correct, and this theme will come up later, that the reason why there was no halting of this particular receipt of donations was that, in fact, the president was in control of the party, the then president?
Yes, certainly. The president plays a very key role in the life of the party. He leads, or she leads the party, and provides leadership and gives direction. That is so.
Now, we've been accused in the media, Mr. President, of having kid gloves on. They certainly won't remain on today. And perhaps it's important for the public to understand, Chair, this is a commission of inquiry. It's not a trial. We are not here to panel beat the answers in accordance with any particular view. This is an opportunity for you, Mr. President, to say, and you've said, what you think, good or bad, whatever the public might think about it. This is your opportunity to say it. Nevertheless, there are certain things that we do have to raise, which we will raise today. And the one is the CR17 donation from Bosasa operations into the FNB account. Now, this has been dealt with by you. I gave you forewarning of it yesterday. This is an opportunity to explain to the public and the Commission what happened.
Well, there are two aspects to this. The one aspect is the donation that was solicited by one of my colleagues into the funds of the CR17 campaign. Now, the campaign managers had taken a conscious decision that they would not involve me at all in the fundraising process. They had also taken a conscious decision to say they would not want me to even know who would give money to the campaign, because they wanted almost to create a wall that those people who gave money should never really think that there is anything they will get in return. And that if I knew, there could be that compromise. So they took a conscious decision, and they told me that this is what we have decided. You are the candidate, we are the campaign managers, and we're building a wall, and we're going to make sure you don't know where the money will come from. We will, however, as time went on, we will, however, want money from you. They solicited money directly from me, which I gladly gave, and it was put in an account, and I never knew. Up till today, I don't know how those funds have been managed. I did meet some of the people who gave money at dinners or whatever to explain precisely what we were seeking to achieve by my candidature, and that's where it ended. So when one of my colleagues then approached, I think, one of the Watson brothers, whom he knew from long ago, because he was a comrade before he passed away, comrade in ANC structures, UDF structures, and all that. to give money, he seems to have said, I want you to give money personally, from your own money, and not, it seems like he made that distinction, from your own purse and not from the company itself. So that is what I believe he seems to have done. So of course, as the story, was made public, it seemed like it came from Bosasa. I don't quite remember the finer detail. I think it came from him or one of his companies or accounts. And I think the public protector and the legal processes looked into all that. So that is the one aspect that had to do with monies, that had to do with anything Bosasa related, even though I think the money never really came from there. So I was far away from the finances that financed the CR17 campaign for the reasons that I've articulated, that the managers did not want me to know, so that I should never be beholden to any of the people who gave money to the campaign. And as it turned out, we had maybe by osmosis in the ANC, arrived at a situation where there are formal campaigns that are now mounted for people to be elected to positions. It never used to be like that in the past. And we still bemoan the fact that we have now arrived at a campaign-style type of contestation for leadership, which is regrettable, but that's where we are. And I'll remark on this in a little while. The other part was how the campaign managers then went ahead to raise money for the campaign. It's been said that R1 billion was raised. It was never R1 billion. I'm told that the money that was raised was some 300 million or so, but never R1 billion. But I don't know the full facts, because they've literally decided to keep it away from me. And the money, what was it used for? There's a legend that goes around that the money was used to buy votes, and far from it. And I said to my comrades right at the beginning, I never want to be part of a campaign that is going to descend into all these deviant type of behaviors that we talk about in the ANC about vote buying. And I even said I would rather lose the race rather than have votes bought. So what was the money used for? It was used to transport people, to hire venues. And actually, I got really surprised that it has become so expensive to have all these things like meetings, busing people, feeding people, the paraphernalia, T-shirts, caps, and so forth that have to be given out for the campaign. And I think people who have run campaigns will know that, yes, there is a cost to all that. As it turns out, there is still a debt that still has to be paid in a number of forms and ways after that campaign that happened in 2017. So money was used for that. And I guess one of the key issues and challenges is that the people who were running the campaign were so methodical. They recorded everything in black and white. They recorded who was given money, what was it for, and some of the money was deposited into people's account to pass on to others, to people in the regions and people all over. And most of that money was then distributed for a branch to hold a meeting, to hire the venue, for people to travel, for airtime, and all those types of things. So when it came to, people often talk about these accounts that are locked up or where the court decided. And that had nothing to do with me because I've been blocked from all that. And the comrades who ran the campaign have been quite almost Philistine in ensuring that that is held to themselves, and I never get involved in all that. But be that as it may, that is now being deliberated by the courts. And in some ways, quite a bit of the information about who gave money is known. It's those who've taken the matter to court know who gave the money. And the money that was given was also donated by a number of people. And many people, as they give money in the old dispensation before the new law about political funding takes place, they gave money on the understanding that we don't want it to be publicized that we've given money for a political campaign. So they wanted their own identity to be kept out of the media. And it was on that type of condition which the campaign managers agreed to. They said, okay, of course you're giving money, and we will keep your information confidential to ourselves, as it has always been the case with a number of monies that are given to political parties. Political parties, by their very nature, go around asking for donations, and I think it will not be surprising for them to hear that other donors don't want the information to be known. So this is now the subject of a major court battle. But in the end, Chairperson, there was nothing sinister, I must say, about the CR17 campaign, nothing underhand. People always say and fear that those who gave money wanted something in return. I would never allow that. And I would also say, and because I don't know, that to me is a safeguard. You know how much so-and-so gave and all that, because they kept it away from me. I should say, so that I should never be seen to be economic with the truth. Some of the people who gave money, I got to know, because some of them would tell me that I have given money, and how much they've given, I don't know. So I should never be heard to be saying I don't know all. Some of them I know, but I would say the majority I don't know till today. And I've sought sometimes to ask, they say, no, we agreed at the beginning of the campaign that we are not going to tell you, and we are sticking to that. And there are like 3 or 4 people who are the key principals of this. They are like the able-bodied people who refuse to even come out with the information. So that is how CR17 went. And beyond that, there were lots of court cases. The public protector got involved because, I should explain this, when some of the money was given, particularly by Mr. Watson, it went from one account to another, and that was his own arrangement. Having been asked by one of my colleagues to give money, and even that colleague never told me, by the way, that he asked for money from Watson. And he moved the money from one account to the other, and it sounded then to the public protector that that was money laundering, and there was no such money laundering rather. And that is what I can say about the CR17 campaign saga, if I can call it that. And then there have been calls by other people to say, well, we should also look at other campaigns. Let's look at other campaigns. And I've often said, comrades, it's enough to look at the CR17 only. It is enough. Let's put this behind us. I said that because soon after this whole story broke out, I went to the NEC and I said to the NEC, I'd like us as the ANC now to start regulating how internal leadership contests are managed in the ANC because we don't have such rules. I should hasten to add that in 2012, after I think the Polokwane conference, an attempt was made to regulate this. And there was...
Or the Mangaung conference or the Polokwane conference?
I think it could have been
2012.
Yeah, 2012.
2012 was Mangaung, I think.
It was Mangaung, yes, yes. Deputy Chief Justice, you know so much. It was at the Mangaung conference where a constitutional provision was drafted, and the NEC was instructed in one way or another to finalize this, and that constitutional provision never saw its way into the Constitution. Until today, we don't know how it happened, why it happened. And some journalists have written about it. And that provision was going to be saying, we need to regulate how these contests are run and funded. And it basically said there should be no fundraising, there should be no this and that and that. So that was never regulated, and that is why these campaigns, and almost on their own, there were 7 campaigns for leadership for president leading up to Nasrec, or to the 54th conference, and they were all somehow funded. They were all somehow managed in one way or another, which in a way shows that a new era has arrived in the ANC, but it needs to be regulated. So I was the first to go to the NEC and said, in the light of what we've been through, and in the light of what I personally have been through, it is important that we should regulate the running of these campaigns. We should regulate the funding thereof, the management of the campaigns, how much money should be given, if any, and there should be accountability. After each campaign, there should be full accountability of money that was given, what it was used for, where it came from, and so forth. So this issue, Mr. Pretorius, that you also clasped together with political party funding, originates largely from the ANC. The first issue about political party funding was first discussed in the ANC was it 2012 or even earlier? I think it was in Polokwane, which would have been the earlier conference of the 50th conference, or 51st conference. We discussed it then and said we need to regulate party political funding. The law that we now have originated from discussions in the ANC. And similarly, this provision that I'm calling for to regulate political party funding for internal contests is something that we will discuss and come to a more sensible conclusion around it, so that we never have any doubt that conferences were bought, as there has been a doubt about my election, that my election was bought, which is absolutely untrue, completely devoid of any truth whatsoever. And I'm prepared to lay out everything. Thank you very much.
You referred to litigation, Mr. President, and we know that matters related to the public protector were before court, and the High Court was given your full explanation on oath, and its comment was that that explanation was both honest and reasonable. That's a matter of public record.
Yes.
You recall that. But two issues arise out of your answer, well, three perhaps, and I think you've answered the third issue now, is that the principles which apply to party funding should also apply to individual campaigns within a party.
Yes.
Is that acceptable?
It is acceptable to me, yes.
Right. The second issue is that if those principles apply to internal contests, party contests, then the public, well, first of all, the recipient of the donation should know. That firewall is perhaps not the best idea in those circumstances. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, the electorate, the ANC electorate, and the people out there who may be affected in the sense that public officials are now, their careers are at stake, they should also know that's an acceptable principle.
Yes, I would accept that. And the reason I would is that, there needs also to be a limitation. The limitation of how much should be given, even as we raise money. Because to avoid a situation where you could have huge amounts coming from one donor, because that will give rise to a sense and a suspicion that they need to be given preeminence in a relationship. So if there is a limit and everybody knows that this is the limit that everybody could give, like now we have created a limit that 15 million is the most that can be given. So it basically means that there can be no donor who could give much more than that. Of course, it's to the disadvantage of political parties, but that is how our democratic system should work, because that adds to transparency, openness, and also confidence. It gives people confidence in that regard. So I would agree to that.
Similarly to the SASA facts and history and its relationship to the ANC, there has been an admission by ANC Treasurer General Willem Mkhize that the Guptas also donated money to the ANC over the years.
Yes, the then Treasurer General has admitted to that fact.
And there can be no doubt that the conduct of the Guptas had also received high visibility in the media and elsewhere. There can be no doubt that any donation from the Guptas should have been investigated.
Yes, I would say so too.
There is in fact an allegation that was made to the Treasurer General that the Guptas footed the bill for the ANC's 2012 conference in Mangaung. Is that correct?
I've heard of this allegation, yes.
Do you know whether it is correct?
No, I don't.
All right. The point about that and the point about the SASA donations is that surely there was enough information current against the principle that the ANC would never knowingly accept donations that were the proceeds of criminal conduct, that there should have been an internal investigation at the time, both in relation to BASASA investigations and in relation to Gupta donations.
Yes, I would concede that there should have been possibly an internal examination. I don't know the extent to which an investigation would have been possible, but an examination, because an investigation conjures up in one's mind the idea that you will subpoena this document, you will get this and that, and being a political party, I know the limitations even of the powers of a Secretary General to subpoena documentation and evidence. So there should have been an examination.
Could have been outsourced.
Pardon?
It could have been outsourced, the investigation.
Well, that's a thought. It could certainly have been outsourced, yes. Could have been.
To move on to a different topic in regard to party funding, I raised the issue yesterday, Mr. President, with you about what I understood then to be 2 affidavits. In fact, it's 1 affidavit which was provided to your team overnight. That, to put it briefly, the affidavit is some 170 pages, makes some very strong allegations, but to put it very briefly, and given these restrictions of time, ambassadors appointed by the president, because the president appoints ambassadors, were required to sign debit forms in order to pay monthly contributions to the ANC. Do you know of that?
Well, let me say I know of this in a different guise. And I didn't have the benefit of going through the 170 pages for my bedtime reading last night, so I didn't go through that. But let me say, those who would have received that as per their membership of the African National Congress. As ANC members, right from 1994, we took the view that we are a party that is strapped for money, and we need to scour all over to find money. And one of the best ways was to ask those who are members of the ANC to sign a levy form that they agree that the banks should channel money from their salaries or from their accounts to the ANC. Now, when I was in business, as a member of the ANC, I did that as well. I signed a levy form, and every month, money was docked from my account to the ANC coffers, as per ANC member. Now, that happens to many people. And those that it gets to be known are, active in places where the ANC knows that you are getting a salary, be it in the private sector, and I was in the private sector, I paid, or in the public sector. For instance, today every member of parliament representing the ANC legislature and local government, we pay levies to the ANC so that we can boost the coffers of the ANC. And the same would happen if you're an ANC member. If you are, say, the chair or the CEO of one of the entities. Or if you're an ANC member, I know when I was Secretary General, I used to solicit members who are in the private sector to sign levy forms. Just anyone I knew would be a member of the ANC, I would say, sign a levy form and give money. And because you're in the private sector, give more money, which is exactly what happened to me. Whereas others would be giving 5,000 or 2,500, I would be giving 10 to 15,000 because presumably one would be earning more. So it is in that context that I would say, even ambassadors who are ANC members they don't do it because they are appointed as ambassadors. They do it because they are ANC members.
Thank you. Mr. Malloy, as I understand it, does say, or Ambassador Malloy does say that this contribution required by the ANC is paid by even those who are not members of the ANC as a reciprocal obligation for being appointed to the ambassadorship in the first place. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't know anything about that. I would have a huge question mark around that.
Right. Something that perhaps may be investigated.
Yeah.
The practice of donations to the parties, does it apply to all persons deployed into public office?
Yes, it does. I'm afraid it does. As I said, every member of parliament representing the ANC at local, provincial, and national level does give money to the ANC.
There's a third aspect to the funding relationship that the ANC has with members or even non-members. There's been evidence of the Free State asbestos scheme. You would have known about that, where, to put it in very broad terms and subject obviously to certain qualifications, a contract was awarded to Blackhead Consulting, a firm owned by Mr. Edwin Sodi. Its tender value was approximately 255 million rand. It was subcontracted for 50 million rand. It was again subcontracted for approximately 20 million rand, and there was still profit left for the second subcontractor to take over. Mr. Sodi then, to the knowledge, it must be, of those who granted the contract, officials in the Free State, made a large profit, and from that profit made several substantial donations to the ANC. Now, that is a matter of record and also a matter of criminal charges now. Two aspects arise. One, it is evidence of the very patronage practice that has been identified by the ANC and spoken about by the ANC, and we'll deal with that in due course. But is it not a concerning practice or pattern that proceeds of procurement, state procurement, go to private companies associated with and known to persons who are members of the ANC or might be members of the ANC, and then come back to the party? In other words, the proceeds of procurement around which there's a question mark come to the party as donations. Is that not an important issue that requires consideration?
Well, I think in the way you have qualified this by saying around which there's a question mark, that certainly should be a matter that makes us take a second look at this and say, should this be happening? However, I should say, and the backdrop to this is that we now have legislation that's going to regulate donations. I should, however, say that there is inherently nothing wrong if there should be, in the past, there would have been nothing wrong if a business entity then donated money, which money was not given in return for anything, for any favors. Say, if a business entity, whatever business it does, as long as it is not illegal, unlawful, gives money and does not want anything in return, in my book, there's patently nothing wrong. There is everything wrong if that business wants something in return, that we want you to favor us when it comes to a procurement or a service that we need to provide and all that. So that, in my book, should not be allowed. But, Chairperson, we now have a revolution underway, which in many ways is going to save our democracy, in that donations that now have to be made have to be accounted for. If a political party receives a donation, it has to be kept at a particular amount and it must be accounted for in the books. And the IEC is going to be rigorous when it comes to this, and I would expect that our other agencies would also be wide awake when it comes to this. So one is not able to comment fully on the asbestos case because it is a subject of legal processes, so one leaves that as it is. But in terms of the question that you have qualified, I would say yes.
Right. The next source of political party funding is the use of state resources for political party activities. We have evidence that Telkom sponsored an ANC conference. Mr. Montana and Mr. Molefe, albeit that they were on either side of a quite firm fence, spoke about PRASA providing facilities, transport, and other support for the ANC. Again, pressures of time, surely that can't be
I would agree
accepted.
I would agree that should not happen because those are public monies. And it creates a problem when monies that are meant to be managed by one of our state institutions are then utilized for party political funding. Now, you could say, if the situation were to allow, if they were going to give money right across to all parties, that would be different. But I don't think that too should be allowed because the monies that APRASA and ESCOM and all these others have should be used for developmental purposes, develop infrastructure, develop everything they do for the majority of people. So the Party Political Funding Act comes in handy here as well because it will help us to prevent these sorts of things from happening.
The Political Party Funding Act, I'm told by our research team that it was passed by Parliament in 2018 and signed into law by yourself, Mr. President, in January 2019, but promulgated in April this year. Why was there that delay? Were there political pressures involved?
All things like these have to be properly and fully discussed and fully embraced. And as Mr. Mantashe said, things in political organizations take a long time to happen. That's precisely what happened here as well. Whilst it was the ANC conference that decided, and if my recollection is correct, it decided at its 50th conference that there should be regulation of party political funding. And the process leading up to where it is finally, to where the president was able to set a date for the commencement of the act, has been fraught with a lot of discussion. And some of it, just to give you a flavor, is that even the political parties in parliament themselves had great challenges with this law because whilst the ANC had discussed it and whilst it was introduced by some of into parliament, we found that political parties were not ready. Simply put, they were not ready for this to come into effect. When they started looking at their balance sheets, where they get money from, they realized that unless the fiscus is able to, give sufficient money to fuel their own democratic processes, it was going to be difficult to have money, sufficient money, and even their donors would balk at the idea of being their information that they've given money being known by everyone. So whilst it is good for democracy, in the end, it's going to be very difficult for political parties for their funding purposes. So it took a while. It took quite a while, debates internal to many of the political parties, and even in the ANC. And finally, we've arrived where we are. And in the end, the president had to say, we've got to sign this bill and it must come into effect. And that is the journey that we have traversed. And with the maturing of our democracy, some of these things take a while. They take some time to happen, but I would say even there's a saying in Afrikaans, which I now, die agteroors kom ook in die kraal. Even the slowest ox does come into the crawl. So I would say that's exactly what has happened.
This was a very slow ox, it seems.
It was a slow ox.
There is one other aspect in relation to party funding that we can probably better deal with when you return, Mr. President. But on the principle that secrecy should never be utilized to trump or cover up criminality, that principle is expressed in a regulation which ironically is itself secret, but that we may come to in due course. The State Security Agency, there's been evidence that money has been used, state money, taxpayer money has been used in funding political activities. That is a matter that I would like to deal with next time, but for the moment, simply to ask you to comment. There's also been evidence that the CR17 campaign was disrupted through funds supplied by the SSA. Do you know anything about that? That would be entirely criminal. So
that it was disrupted?
Yes. Well, the precise manner of disruption is not entirely clear, but the reports were that the regalia that was being provided to your supporters was interfered with, let me put it that way. You know of that?
No, I don't know about that.
Perhaps we'll get further information in that regard. But do you know of any circumstance where state security funds have been used in relation to party activities?
I have heard, but I have no evidence that, yes, they have been utilized, but I have no evidence.
We will deal more comprehensively with the state security evidence, but it does seem that many of these issues require proper outsourced and empowered investigation, and that will be put to you, and it seems without much dissent. Then there is one other issue that has arisen in papers fairly submitted by yourself, and that is the issue of branches and vote buying, but I'd like to deal with that later, if I may. If I may go back to another issue briefly, hopefully. We discussed yesterday the Eye of the Needle document. that 2001 document, which was a very important document in the history of the African National Congress, as I understand it. There was in 2020 a review of this document, and it appears in your own bundle at page 449, bundle 1449.
549.
449.
Did you say bundle 1 or bundle 2?
Bundle 1, 449.
Yes. I try to be like you.
That document is a review of the Eye of the Needle document. Do I understand it correctly?
Yes.
It says many things, but it does say in its 2020 review, and we've put on record the problems highlighted in 2001 in the document, that something deeper has gone wrong. Deviant behavior is finding protection and is thriving inside the ANC Liberation Alliance. Now, the proposition has already been put, and it may be put again.
Where were you reading?
If I may just get it for you. Page 450.
Yes.
Paragraph 14, bottom of the first column.
Yes.
It is now acknowledged that something deeper has gone wrong in the movement. Deviant behavior is finding protection and is thriving inside the ANC-led Liberation Alliance. It is perhaps the fact that the document is dealing with the needle and not the needle. It is the size of the needle. And then it goes into a series of analogies. If one goes to the first paragraph to put that statement in its context, the introduction reads in paragraph 1 on page 449, it has been 30 years since the unbanning of the ANC. It has been 26 years since the democratic breakthrough. It has been more than 19 years since, through the eye of a needle, choosing the best cadres to elite transformation document was produced. In these years, the ANC has grown in membership, and yet the qualities of its cadres is fast diminishing. Now, we don't have time, unfortunately, but it would be instructive to go through the various statements made by various presidents, amongst others, over the intervening years between 2001 and 2020. And I will come to your own documents shortly. But it seems that the problems, not only generally, but in particular, patronage, corruption, and the like, factionalism, were always present throughout these years. They have never been successfully dealt with. And the language has indeed got stronger, but South Africa looks to the party which governs the levers of power, which govern the people of South Africa, for some change. And the question arises, what is new? But before we get there, may I just go to there's a document on page 581, paragraph 8 of the bundle 1. This is the 52nd National Conference report, the Polokwane Conference of 2007.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 580, 580
Oh, 580.
of bundle 1.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Yes.
You would just bear with me a moment.
Of course.
It's in paragraph 8. I'm sorry, that is in my notes. That's my error. Paragraph 8 on page 581. Now, this is 2007. It reads, "Our accumulated weaknesses include inability to effectively deal with new tendencies arising from being a ruling party, such as social distance, patronage, careerism, corruption, and abuse of powers, ineffective management of the interface between the movement and the state, a flawed approach to membership recruitment, a decline in ideological depth amongst cadres, and a lack of institutional resources to give practical effect to the movement's leadership role." Quite a strong and stark repetition of the issues facing the ANC over the years. This is 2007. What is interesting about it is that a reference is made to new tendencies, but these weren't really new, were they? Did they arise somehow in 2007?
No, I would agree that they were not new tendencies, but they have been evolving. And evolving around a number of eras that we've been through. One of those being, as you read in one of the paragraphs, that being a governing party has given rise to a number of opportunities to be in government, to have access to resources, to be able to dispense patronage, to be in control of, if you like, procurement, resources and opportunities. And that started in 1994, but as time went on, we got used to being the incumbent. Incumbency then gave rise to a whole number of deviant behaviors, which we have acknowledged openly, that this in many ways is the source of our problems, and we've got to navigate our way around, out of these type of problems that we now have. So in 2007, this would not have been new, but I guess you're asking, you've always known that these are the challenges and the problems, and are you able to get yourself out of all these challenges? I guess that's your problem,
Yes.
the question.
Well, perhaps we can deal with that after the long adjournment. I do want to get to 3 statements that you made in August 2020, a month in which you must have been very angry and your blood pressure must have been very high. But we will get to them in due course.
Okay.
Okay, it's 6 minutes past 1. Let's take the lunch adjournment and we will resume at 2:05. We adjourn.